The first rumor spread through the homeowners association long before anyone actually saw the new owner. People inside Cedar Hollow Estates had a habit of treating gossip like official news. The gated community sat in the middle of rolling hills and pine forest, several miles outside the nearest town, built for people who wanted the appearance of rustic living without sacrificing comfort. Every driveway was paved, every mailbox matched. Every lawn had to stay within exact landscaping standards approved by the board. Even the shades of exterior paint were regulated down to a narrow palette of approved earth tones. The residents loved rules because rules made them feel secure. For over 15 years, Cedar Hollow Estates operated like its own private kingdom. The HOA board controlled nearly every visible aspect of life inside the community. Holiday decorations had deadlines. Garbage cans had to disappear within 1 hour after collection. Residents received warning letters for parking pickup trucks in open view overnight. The board prided itself on maintaining property values, a phrase repeated so often it became less of a concern and more of a religion. The community's isolation only strengthened that mentality. The entire neighborhood sat beyond a deep river gorge, with only one access point connecting it to the main county road, an old steel and timber bridge spanning the river below. Residents crossed it every day without thinking about it. School buses used it. Delivery trucks used it. Emergency services used it. It had always been there. Most people assumed the county owned it. Nobody bothered checking. The land beyond the bridge stretched for miles into untouched woodland and abandoned ranch territory. Much of it had once belonged to an old logging family decades earlier, before the business collapsed under debt and lawsuits. Over the years, parcels were divided, sold cheaply, or simply forgotten. Cedar Hollow had eventually been developed near the entrance of the valley because it offered scenic views while remaining close enough to town for commuters. But the deeper acreage remained mostly empty until the purchase happened. At first, residents dismissed the news entirely. 1,400 acres sounded absurd to them. Nobody bought that much land anymore, unless they were corporations, developers, or eccentric billionaires building private compounds. Even then, the people of Cedar Hollow assumed whoever bought the property would eventually come crawling to the HOA, seeking access agreements, utility cooperation, or subdivision approvals. That assumption turned out to be the first major mistake. County property records quietly updated one Monday morning. The entire Northern Valley tract, including forest land, grazing fields, river access, and several abandoned service roads, had transferred ownership to a man named Daniel Mercer. Few residents recognized the name. The HOA board barely acknowledged it during their monthly meeting. They spent more time discussing mailbox violations than they did the largest land purchase in county history. The board president, Elaine Porter, considered the matter beneath concern. Elaine had ruled Cedar Hollow for nearly 8 years, with the kind of authority usually found in small-town political dynasties. She carried herself like someone who believed the community existed because of her leadership, rather than because people paid mortgages there. Residents feared becoming targets of her attention. Contractors learned quickly that arguing with her meant losing future work opportunities inside the neighborhood. Elaine believed control prevented chaos, and she especially disliked outsiders. The first sign of irritation appeared when heavy equipment started arriving beyond the bridge. Residents noticed convoys of trucks moving through the entrance road during the early mornings. Bulldozers, excavators, flatbeds carrying lumber and steel beams. Survey crews appeared throughout the valley, placing markers along tree lines and old dirt roads. Speculation exploded across neighborhood forums. People convinced themselves a luxury resort was coming. Others believed a mining operation had started. Some claimed a celebrity survivalist compound was under construction. One resident insisted the federal government was secretly buying land for environmental seizure programs. Nobody actually knew. The HOA attempted to demand project information from the county planning office, but the response irritated them even further. Daniel Mercer's property fell entirely outside HOA jurisdiction. That fact alone offended Elaine Porter more than anyone realized. Cedar Hollow residents had grown accustomed to influencing nearly everything around them. Businesses near the entrance road often complied with HOA preferences simply because residents represented money and political pressure. Local officials usually entertained their complaints. Contractors adapted to their demands, but Daniel Mercer had not requested approval for anything. Weeks passed before anyone finally saw him. The sight disappointed the neighborhood immediately. Instead of arriving in a luxury SUV or chauffeured vehicle, Mercer drove an older, dark green pickup truck, coated in dust from the valley roads. He looked nothing like the wealthy land developers residents imagined. He appeared closer to a retired rancher than a millionaire investor. Tall, broad-shouldered, usually wearing work jackets and faded caps, he blended into construction crews instead of supervising them from a distance. That somehow annoyed the HOA even more. People expected wealth to look polished. Mercer looked practical. The resentment deepened after he ignored multiple invitations from the HOA board, requesting attendance at community meetings. Elaine framed the invitations as welcoming gestures, but everyone understood their true purpose. She wanted to establish authority immediately. Mercer never responded. By the second month, Cedar Hollow residents began noticing another problem. Traffic across the bridge increased dramatically. Construction vehicles moved constantly between the highway and Mercer's land. The bridge, once quiet except during commuting hours, now groaned under the weight of industrial equipment daily. Residents started complaining online about noise, delays and vibrations. Then came the engineering report. A county inspector temporarily halted several heavy transports after concerns emerged regarding the bridge's structural age. Although still functional, portions required reinforcement before accommodating repeated industrial loads. That announcement triggered panic inside the HOA, not because residents feared collapse, because they suddenly realized nobody knew who was responsible for repairs. The county disclaimed ownership almost immediately. Historical records showed the bridge originated as a private logging structure built decades earlier by the valley's original timber company. When the company dissolved, ownership transferred alongside surrounding land parcels through various legal reorganizations. Most people still assume someone else maintained it. Then Elaine Porter requested a formal title search. 3 days later, the results arrived. The bridge belonged entirely to Daniel Mercer, not just the land around it, the actual bridge. Every support beam, every access approach, every legal easement. The only road connecting Cedar Hollow Estates to the outside world sat on private property, owned by a man the HOA had already antagonized for weeks. The atmosphere inside the community changed overnight. Residents who previously mocked Mercer suddenly studied property maps with growing anxiety. Lawyers within the neighborhood quietly reviewed easement laws. Online discussions turned from arrogance to concern almost instantly, because for the first time in Cedar Hollow's history, the HOA realized its control had limits, and the man holding that leverage had shown absolutely no interest in cooperating with them. Elaine Porter refused to panic publicly, but privately, she understood the danger immediately. The bridge wasn't merely infrastructure, it was power. And for the first time since Cedar Hollow existed, somebody else held it. By the following week, Elaine organized an emergency HOA board meeting behind closed doors. Meanwhile, across the river beyond the trees, Daniel Mercer continued construction without acknowledging the storm beginning to form around him. And that silence unsettled the neighborhood more than any threat possibly could. The emergency HOA meeting lasted nearly 4 hours, and by the end of it, Cedar Hollow Estates no longer viewed Daniel Mercer as a harmless outsider with too much land. He had become a problem. The atmosphere inside the clubhouse boardroom shifted between panic and denial as the association members reviewed legal documents spread across the polished oak conference table. Copies of county maps, easement filings, tax records, and bridge maintenance reports covered nearly every surface. Residents who normally spent meetings arguing about landscaping fines now sat silent, while attorneys explained a reality nobody wanted to hear. The community's only access route was privately owned. Worse, historical easement language appeared dangerously vague. The original agreements dated back decades to the old logging operation that once controlled the valley. Cedar Hollow's developers had apparently relied on inherited roadway access rights when constructing the neighborhood years earlier, assuming the bridge issue would never become relevant. Nobody anticipated a single individual eventually acquiring nearly all surrounding acreage. But Daniel Mercer had done exactly that. The HOA attorneys offered cautious reassurance, though even they sounded uncertain. Residents likely retained legal access rights through implied easements and historical usage. Emergency closure of the bridge would probably trigger court intervention. However, ownership still granted Mercer significant authority over maintenance schedules, weight limits, repairs, and property access conditions. Those details terrified Elaine Porter because authority, even partial authority, belonged to someone outside her influence. Elaine hated situations she could not dominate. The board quickly agreed on a strategy. They would pressure Mercer into cooperation immediately, before he recognized the full extent of his leverage. At first, they approached the situation with the same methods that had worked against contractors, residents, and local businesses for years. Formal letters were drafted demanding clarification regarding construction plans, traffic schedules, environmental impact assessments, and future development intentions. The wording carried the usual polished tone Cedar Hollow used whenever disguising threats as professionalism. Mercer ignored every letter. That only intensified Elaine's determination. Within days, HOA representatives began documenting supposed violations connected to Mercer's activity near the bridge entrance. Residents photographed parked machinery from public roads. Complaints flooded county offices alleging runoff concerns, noise disturbances, unsafe vehicle operations, and potential zoning infractions. Most accusations went nowhere. County inspectors visited repeatedly but found Mercer's permits valid and his crews compliant. Temporary inconvenience from construction traffic failed to justify enforcement actions. The more Cedar Hollow complained, the more irritated county officials became. Several employees privately admitted they were tired of the HOA treating the county government like a personal customer service department. But Elaine refused to stop. Her frustration grew worse each morning when she drove across the bridge and saw Mercer's operation expanding deeper into the valley. New gravel roads appeared through the trees. Utility poles rose along cleared paths. Large equipment moved with organized precision, suggesting long-term infrastructure plans rather than temporary projects. Nobody knew what Mercer was building. That uncertainty allowed rumors to evolve into paranoia. Residents convinced themselves property values would collapse. Some feared industrial development. Others claimed Mercer planned commercial hunting grounds or RV parks that would bring tourists flooding through the valley. One especially dramatic rumor suggested he intended to construct low-income housing purely to destroy Cedar Hollow's exclusivity. Fear spread faster than facts. The HOA weaponized that fear expertly. Community newsletters began framing Mercer as a destabilizing force, threatening the peaceful residential character of the area. Elaine carefully avoided direct accusations that could trigger lawsuits, but her messaging encouraged residents to see themselves as victims under siege by an uncooperative landowner. It worked. People who had never cared about the surrounding valley suddenly obsessed over every movement beyond the bridge. Then came the incident with the delivery trucks. A furniture company attempting to access Cedar Hollow received temporary instructions from Mercer's road crews to wait while bridge reinforcement inspections occurred. The delay lasted less than 30 minutes, but one resident posted an exaggerated account online claiming Mercer's workers were controlling access to the neighborhood. That single phrase ignited outrage. By evening, neighborhood forums overflowed with demands for legal retaliation. Residents spoke about Mercer as though he were holding the community hostage, despite the fact construction crews had merely paused oversized vehicle crossings for safety reasons. Elaine recognized opportunity immediately. Instead of calming tensions, she escalated them. The HOA announced formation of a bridge protection committee dedicated to defending residents' access rights. Lawyers received authorization for expanded legal review. Residents volunteered donations toward a litigation fund. Conversations inside Cedar Hollow became increasingly hostile toward a man most people had never even met. Mercer still said nothing publicly. That silence started affecting Elaine psychologically. She expected confrontation. She understood arguments, negotiations, intimidation, and public pressure. Those were environments where she thrived. But Mercer refused to participate in any of it. He ignored letters, ignored rumors, ignored indirect threats. Meanwhile, construction continued uninterrupted. That calmness made the HOA feel powerless. The first direct confrontation finally happened almost by accident. Elaine encountered Mercer near the bridge one cloudy afternoon after county inspectors completed another structural review. Residents later described the moment like a scene from a movie because so many people witnessed it from passing vehicles. Mercer stood beside a flatbed trailer reviewing documents with engineers, while workers unloaded steel reinforcement materials nearby. Elaine stopped her SUV directly beside the work zone and approached him, carrying a folder thick with HOA paperwork. Witnesses expected fireworks. Instead, the interaction appeared strangely one-sided. Elaine spoke intensely for several minutes, while Mercer listened with little visible reaction. She pointed repeatedly toward the neighborhood entrance and occasionally toward the bridge itself. At one point, she handed him several papers. Mercer glanced through them briefly. Then he returned the folder, without signing anything. The encounter lasted less than 10 minutes. Elaine left visibly furious. Mercer calmly resumed discussing construction plans with his engineers, as though nothing important had happened. That image spread throughout Cedar Hollow before sunset. Residents interpreted Mercer's behavior as arrogance. Elaine privately described him as hostile and dismissive during the next HOA briefing. She claimed he refused reasonable cooperation requests and displayed concerning indifference toward community concerns. What she did not mention was the specific issue Mercer rejected. The HOA had attempted to demand shared authority over bridge operations. Mercer declined immediately. That refusal transformed tension into open hostility. Within the next week, Cedar Hollow escalated aggressively. Residents began reporting Mercer's workers for fabricated traffic violations. Anonymous complaints targeted construction permits. Someone damaged survey markers along a property line near the bridge road. Another resident flew a drone repeatedly over Mercer's land, attempting to photograph operations deeper in the valley. The drone never returned. Its remains later appeared beside the neighborhood entrance, with a printed copy of federal airspace regulations attached to it. That moment embarrassed the HOA publicly. Even residents who disliked Mercer started recognizing something uncomfortable. The man clearly understood the law better than the people trying to intimidate him. Then the county released updated bridge assessment findings. The report confirmed the structure required substantial long-term rehabilitation due to decades of deferred maintenance predating Mercer's ownership. While still safe for regular traffic, engineers recommended immediate restrictions for overloaded commercial vehicles until upgrades finished. Mercer responded by funding repairs himself. That single decision completely disrupted the HOA narrative. Residents expected negligence or retaliation. Instead, Mercer hired one of the state's top structural engineering firms and initiated expensive restoration work without requesting a single dollar from Cedar Hollow. The realization hit people hard. The man they painted as a threat was personally financing repairs on the only bridge serving their community, and legally, he did not have to do it quickly, or cheaply, or at all. For the first time, cracks began forming inside the HOA itself. Some residents questioned Elaine's strategy privately. Others wondered whether antagonizing Mercer had been a catastrophic mistake. A few board members quietly worried about potential lawsuits if the association continued escalating conflicts without legitimate cause. Elaine ignored every warning sign, because by that point, the conflict had become personal. She no longer cared about property values or bridge maintenance. She cared about winning. And people like Elaine often became most dangerous precisely when they started losing control. By the end of the month, Mercer's repair crews installed temporary traffic controls on the bridge during reinforcement work. Minor delays became unavoidable. Then one morning, Cedar Hollow residents discovered something that pushed the entire situation into chaos. A newly installed sign stood at the bridge entrance. Private structure. ASCII access easement in effect. Weight and safety restrictions enforced under state law. Beneath it sat another, smaller notice. All commercial vehicles subject to owner approval during active repairs. For the first time, the HOA was staring at undeniable proof that Daniel Mercer intended to exercise his ownership rights openly. And Elaine Porter immediately decided she was going to stop him, no matter how far the conflict had to go. The sign at the bridge entrance changed everything. Until that moment, most Cedar Hollow residents still believed the conflict with Daniel Mercer would eventually fade into a legal technicality or quiet compromise. They assumed the county would intervene or the courts would force some permanent public access arrangement before the situation escalated any further. But the sign made the ownership real. Every resident crossing the river now faced a daily reminder that the only road connecting their expensive homes to the outside world existed entirely at the discretion of a man the HOA had spent months antagonizing. The psychological impact hit harder than anyone expected. People suddenly noticed the bridge itself for the first time in years. Residents slowed while driving across it, staring at the steel framework beneath their tires, as if it had transformed overnight into unstable foreign territory. Conversations at the community gym, tennis courts and mailbox stations revolved around easements, property law, and bridge access rights. Fear settled over Cedar Hollow like a storm cloud. Elaine Porter used that fear immediately. Within days, the HOA launched what residents later called the Bridge Protection Campaign. Officially, the campaign existed to preserve uninterrupted community access and protect homeowner property values. Unofficially, it became a coordinated effort to pressure Daniel Mercer from every possible direction. The association hired a larger law firm from the city. Investigators were retained to examine Mercer's business history. Public records requests flooded county departments. Residents received email templates encouraging them to contact state transportation agencies regarding unsafe privatization concerns. Some homeowners even placed large signs in their yards reading, "Keep our bridge public." The irony escaped most of them. Because it had never been public, the campaign quickly evolved into something uglier. Construction crews working near the bridge started reporting harassment from passing drivers. Equipment operators found nails scattered near vehicle staging areas. Portable fencing was damaged repeatedly during the night. Someone spray-painted "property thief" across temporary repair barriers one weekend before dawn. Mercer responded with silence. Again, no public statements, no threats, no interviews, no retaliation. That silence became unbearable for Elaine Porter. She expected outrage. She expected emotional reactions she could manipulate publicly. Instead, Mercer simply expanded security around the bridge work zone and continued repairs. The calmer he appeared, the more unstable the HOA became. Residents began interpreting ordinary construction inconveniences as deliberate acts of aggression. If traffic slowed for 10 minutes, social media exploded with accusations. If work crews blocked one lane temporarily, rumors spread that Mercer intended to shut the community down entirely. Facts no longer mattered. Emotion had taken over. Then came the delivery restrictions. Heavy reinforcement work required Mercer's engineering team to limit oversized commercial vehicles crossing the bridge during specific hours. The restrictions were legitimate and fully supported by state safety regulations, but Cedar Hollow treated them like a declaration of war. Furniture deliveries were delayed. Concrete trucks servicing home renovations had to schedule crossing times. Large landscaping vehicles occasionally waited for clearance. To most communities, these would have been minor inconveniences. To Cedar Hollow, they became proof of oppression. Elaine capitalized on every complaint. Emergency HOA meetings turned into theatrical events filled with angry residents demanding action. Lawyers presented dramatic interpretations of property law designed more to reassure frightened homeowners than explain reality. People spoke about Mercer like he was a hostile invader occupying the valley, rather than the legal owner of land surrounding them on nearly every side. The association eventually voted to file formal legal action. That decision marked the true beginning of the bridge war. The lawsuit sought broad declarations regarding permanent public access rights, restrictions on Mercer's authority over the bridge, and claims that his actions endangered the economic stability of the community. Though wrapped in legal terminology, the message underneath was simple. The HOA wanted control, or at minimum, they wanted Mercer stripped of it. Elaine announced the lawsuit with dramatic confidence during a packed community meeting inside the clubhouse ballroom. Residents applauded like they were celebrating a military victory, but outside the neighborhood bubble, reactions looked very different. County officials quietly viewed the HOA as reckless. Local reporters began covering the dispute with growing fascination because the situation sounded almost unbelievable. A wealthy, gated community discovering too late that their only access bridge belonged to a private landowner they had antagonized publicly. Online audiences loved the story instantly. Articles spread across regional news sites. Comment sections exploded with mockery directed toward the HOA. People outside Cedar Hollow overwhelmingly sided with Mercer, especially after learning he was personally funding bridge repairs while residents attacked him publicly. That shift infuriated Elaine. She expected sympathy. Instead, the HOA became the villain. The situation worsened after reporters uncovered historical details about Cedar Hollow's development. Decades earlier, the original neighborhood developers had apparently ignored opportunities to purchase permanent bridge ownership rights because they considered it unnecessary expense. They assumed surrounding land would eventually become public infrastructure or remain fragmented among small owners forever. Now that decision looked catastrophic, and residents blamed Elaine for failing to manage the crisis. Internal fractures finally started appearing inside the HOA board itself. Several members privately questioned whether continuing the legal battle was wise. Litigation costs were already climbing rapidly. Public opinion had turned hostile. Property listings inside Cedar Hollow began sitting longer on the market as potential buyers learned about the ongoing dispute. One board member quietly resigned. Another stopped attending meetings entirely. Elaine doubled down harder. Her behavior grew increasingly obsessive. Residents noticed she monitored bridge activity personally several times each day. She drove past construction zones repeatedly, taking photographs and documenting equipment movements. HOA emails became more aggressive, warning homeowners that surrendering to Mercer would destroy the community's future. The conflict had stopped being rational. Then Mercer made his first public move. Without warning, his legal team released a detailed statement through county media channels. The statement remained calm, factual, and devastating. It outlined the bridge's ownership history, decades of deferred maintenance inherited with the property, and the millions Mercer had already committed toward structural rehabilitation. It also included documentation showing the HOA had repeatedly interfered with repair operations through harassment, false complaints, and vandalism allegations currently under investigation. But one paragraph changed everything. Mercer's attorneys revealed that during early private discussions, he had originally offered Cedar Hollow a long-term cooperative maintenance agreement with guaranteed unrestricted residential access protections. The HOA rejected it. Worse, they rejected it before discovering he owned the bridge. The revelation detonated inside the community. Residents who previously trusted Elaine completely suddenly realized she never told them about the offer. The agreement could have resolved the conflict months earlier before lawsuits, media coverage, and public humiliation spiraled out of control. Elaine defended herself aggressively, claiming the proposal lacked sufficient legal safeguards. But the damage was done. People started asking dangerous questions. Had the HOA created the entire crisis unnecessarily? Could this have been avoided? Why did Elaine escalate instead of negotiate? Tension inside Cedar Hollow reached levels nobody had experienced before. Neighbors argued openly at community events. Residents accused the board of incompetence. Some demanded emergency elections. Others blamed Mercer for refusing to understand the community. The bridge became the center of everyone's life. And then, the storm hit. 3 straight days of brutal rain pounded the valley harder than any weather event in years. The river beneath the bridge swelled violently, carrying debris and uprooted trees downstream at dangerous speed. Mercer's construction crews worked around the clock monitoring stress points, while emergency alerts warned residents about possible flooding. Late on the 3rd night, disaster nearly happened. A massive dead pine slammed into one of the temporary support structures during peak river surge, damaging reinforcement equipment and destabilizing part of the western approach lane. By dawn, Mercer's engineers made an urgent decision. The bridge needed immediate emergency closure for safety inspections. For the first time in Cedar Hollow history, the community woke up, effectively cut off from the outside world. Panic exploded instantly. Residents flooded HOA communication lines. Social media descended into chaos. Rumors spread faster than facts, with some claiming the bridge had collapsed entirely. Emergency vehicles staged outside the entrance, while engineers assessed damage. And standing at the center of the crisis, directing repair crews personally in pouring rain, was Daniel Mercer. While Elaine Porter watched helplessly from behind police barricades, finally realizing the nightmare scenario she feared most had arrived. Because now the entire community's safety depended completely on the man she had spent months trying to destroy. The bridge closure lasted 14 hours. For most places, that would have been an inconvenience. For Cedar Hollow Estates, it felt like civilization collapsing. Residents woke to police barricades at both ends of the structure, flashing emergency lights reflecting off rain-soaked steel, while county officials redirected all incoming traffic miles away from the valley entrance. School buses never arrived. Morning commuters sat trapped inside the neighborhood, refreshing news updates and HOA alerts every few minutes. The panic spread faster because people realized something deeply unsettling. There was no alternate route, no hidden emergency road through the forest, no secondary county access, no backup infrastructure. One bridge connected Cedar Hollow to the world, and that bridge belonged to Daniel Mercer. The reality struck the community with humiliating force. For years, residents had behaved as though the valley existed solely for their comfort. They complained about landscaping details while ignoring the aging infrastructure beneath them. They assumed roads, utilities, and access simply existed because wealthy communities expected such things to exist. Now everyone understood how fragile that illusion had always been. The storm damage itself was serious but manageable. Mercer's engineers determined the bridge had not structurally failed, but temporary reinforcement supports installed during ongoing rehabilitation suffered impact damage from river debris. Until replacement components were secured and inspected, reopening the structure risked catastrophic failure under heavy traffic loads. State transportation officials supported the closure immediately. That decision enraged the HOA. Elaine Porter appeared at the emergency command area shortly after sunrise, wearing rain boots and a pressed waterproof coat that looked more appropriate for a political campaign stop than an infrastructure crisis. Several residents gathered behind her, expecting confrontation. Instead, they witnessed something worse. Elaine no longer controlled the situation. County engineers ignored her demands for reopening estimates. Emergency personnel focused entirely on Mercer's crews because they were the only people with complete structural plans and repair authority. Contractors moved with organized efficiency around heavy equipment, while officials deferred constantly to Mercer's lead engineer. Even the sheriff's department treated Mercer like the operational authority on site. Elaine hated every second of it. By midday, local news stations arrived. Helicopter footage showed the isolated neighborhood from above, while reporters described the bizarre property dispute that had suddenly evolved into a regional infrastructure emergency. Viewers across the state watched interviews with stranded residents, complaining about uncertainty and access concerns. The story exploded online again, except this time, public sympathy shifted even harder toward Mercer. Footage showed him personally coordinating repairs in miserable weather conditions, while the HOA appeared primarily concerned with blame and optics. Residents outside Cedar Hollow mocked the community relentlessly. Comment sections filled with people pointing out the obvious irony. The same homeowners who spent months attacking Mercer now depended entirely on him to restore access. The pressure inside the neighborhood became unbearable. Property owners started calculating financial damage immediately. Missed workdays, delayed business operations, suspended deliveries, service interruptions. Real estate agents quietly admitted prospective buyers were canceling viewings after hearing about the closure. Then, rumors started spreading that insurance companies might reevaluate coverage risks if the access dispute continued unresolved. That possibility terrified everyone. Cedar Hollow's image relied on exclusivity and stability. The idea that the neighborhood might become known statewide as an isolated legal disaster threatened property values far more than anything Mercer had actually done. Board members began abandoning Elaine openly. 2 senior HOA officers refused to support further litigation unless mediation efforts resumed immediately. Residents demanded emergency meetings. Lawyers privately warned the association that continuing aggressive legal action during an active infrastructure emergency could damage their position badly in court. Elaine responded by becoming more reckless. Instead of calming tensions, she accused Mercer publicly of exploiting the storm for leverage. During one disastrous interview near the bridge entrance, She implied the repairs were intentionally delayed to pressure the community into surrendering legal rights. The accusation backfired instantly. Hours later, county officials released inspection timelines, confirming Mercer's crews completed stabilization work significantly faster than state projections estimated possible. Independent engineers praised the response publicly. Even transportation authorities acknowledged that without Mercer's ongoing rehabilitation project already underway, the storm damage could have destroyed the bridge entirely. Suddenly, Mercer looked less like a villain and more like the reason Cedar Hollow still had a bridge at all. Residents turned on Elaine with shocking speed. Community forums that once supported the HOA president became hostile overnight. People demanded explanations about the rejected maintenance agreement Mercer originally offered months earlier. Others questioned why the board spent enormous legal fees fighting the very person now protecting the community's access. The mood inside Cedar Hollow transformed from anger into fear, because residents finally understood the deeper problem. Daniel Mercer was not obligated to rescue them financially. Yes, emergency easement laws protected residential access in broad terms, but ownership still carried enormous influence over maintenance schedules, future upgrades, liability decisions, and operational management. If Mercer chose to move slowly, follow every bureaucratic process to the letter, and maximize legal caution at every stage, the HOA had very little power to stop him, and after months of harassment, nobody could confidently predict what he might do next. Late that evening, the bridge partially reopened under strict limitations. Passenger vehicles crossed in controlled intervals, while repair crews continued reinforcement work overnight. Residents returning from the outside world drove slowly across the structure, staring at welding sparks and floodlights illuminating the river below. For many, it was the first time they truly appreciated the bridge at all. The following morning brought another shock. Mercer released detailed plans for a completely new bridge project. The proposal included a modern, reinforced concrete structure built alongside the original crossing, designed to support emergency services, heavy commercial traffic, and long-term regional development. Preliminary engineering estimates placed construction costs in the tens of millions, and Mercer intended to fund it privately. The announcement detonated inside Cedar Hollow. Some residents reacted with relief, seeing the project as permanent security for the community. Others immediately grew suspicious, convinced Mercer planned hidden commercial expansion deeper into the valley. Elaine viewed it differently. She saw a permanent loss of leverage. A new bridge would cement Mercer's control over regional infrastructure for generations. It would also destroy the HOA's legal narrative, portraying him as irresponsible or dangerous. Public officials already favored the project because the county lacked resources for infrastructure expansion independently. If Mercer succeeded, Cedar Hollow would forever remain dependent on a man Elaine failed to intimidate. That reality consumed her completely. Behind closed doors, she pushed the HOA toward one final escalation. The association authorized attorneys to seek emergency injunctions, delaying the bridge project through environmental challenges and zoning disputes. Consultants were hired to examine protected wildlife impacts. Residents near the river received encouragement to file formal objections. The strategy aimed at one goal: delay everything. If the HOA could not control Mercer, Elaine intended to make his plans expensive, exhausting, and politically painful. But by then, the community itself was fracturing badly. Several wealthy homeowners began separate private discussions with Mercer's legal team without HOA approval. Business owners inside Cedar Hollow worried the ongoing conflict threatened their livelihoods. Even longtime Elaine supporters quietly admitted the association had gone too far. And Mercer finally made his first personal appearance inside the neighborhood, not at a board meeting. Not during legal negotiations. At a volunteer emergency preparedness fundraiser organized after the storm, the sight stunned residents. Mercer arrived quietly, donated equipment for the community emergency response team, spoke briefly with county firefighters about future bridge safety coordination, and left before most people even realized he was there. No speeches, no threats, no gloating. That calm professionalism shattered the HOA's narrative more effectively than any lawsuit ever could. Because villains were supposed to act like villains, Mercer kept acting like the only adult in the room. By the end of the week, Elaine Porter's authority inside Cedar Hollow had weakened dramatically. Residents no longer trusted her judgment completely. Board members questioned decisions openly. Recall petitions began circulating privately among homeowners, but Elaine still had one card left to play. And unlike her previous mistakes, this one would push the conflict into territory nobody could easily recover from. Because late one night, while repair crews worked near the riverbank beneath the bridge, security cameras captured someone trespassing inside Mercer's restricted construction zone, someone connected directly to the HOA leadership. And what happened next would turn a property dispute into a criminal investigation. The security footage spread through Cedar Hollow before sunrise. Nobody officially released it at first. County investigators intended to keep the matter quiet while they reviewed evidence from Mercer's construction site. But information traveled fast in a community built on gossip and paranoia. By morning, residents were already whispering about police vehicles near the bridge and deputies questioning contractors beside the riverbank. Then someone leaked screenshots online. The images were grainy from rain and darkness, but recognizable enough to trigger immediate chaos. A vehicle registered to the HOA's vice president had entered the restricted construction zone shortly after midnight. Additional footage showed two individuals moving near temporary reinforcement equipment beneath the western bridge supports during hours when crews were absent. What investigators discovered afterward transformed the situation completely. Several hydraulic stabilization lines had been deliberately cut, not enough to collapse the bridge immediately, enough to weaken temporary support systems during active repair operations. County engineers reacted with alarm because another major storm surge could have turned the damage catastrophic. If the sabotage had gone unnoticed, the bridge might have suffered severe structural failure under normal traffic loads, and hundreds of Cedar Hollow residents crossed it every day. The implications stunned everyone. What began as HOA drama suddenly carried the possibility of criminal charges, public endangerment, and potentially massive civil liability. Elaine Porter attempted damage control immediately. She claimed the footage proved nothing. She described the situation as misunderstandings amplified by media hysteria. HOA attorneys warned residents against jumping to conclusions, while investigators continued examining evidence. But privately, panic consumed the board, because the vice president implicated in the footage, Martin Hale, had been one of Elaine's closest allies throughout the entire bridge conflict. He attended strategy meetings, coordinated legal messaging, and frequently encouraged aggressive action against Mercer during community gatherings. And now, law enforcement wanted answers. The county sheriff's office moved quickly once forensic teams confirmed the damage was intentional. Deputies executed search warrants related to vehicles, communication records, and HOA correspondence tied to the incident. News helicopters returned almost instantly. Regional media devoured the story. The narrative became irresistible. A wealthy, gated community already mocked for feuding with the owner of its only bridge now faced allegations that HOA leadership sabotaged critical infrastructure during emergency repairs. Public opinion collapsed against Cedar Hollow completely. National websites picked up the story within days. Online audiences ridiculed the HOA relentlessly. Commentators compared the situation to reality television plots too absurd to invent. Legal analysts appearing on local broadcasts openly discussed potential felony charges and enormous financial exposure. Inside Cedar Hollow, residents turned on each other viciously. People who once defended Elaine now demanded resignations. Homeowners accused the board of dragging the community into disaster through arrogance and obsession. Emergency meetings devolved into shouting matches, while attorneys warned everyone to stop discussing the investigation publicly. The neighborhood atmosphere became toxic. For sale signs multiplied rapidly. Some residents wanted out before property values fell further. Others feared becoming trapped in endless litigation connected to the bridge dispute. Real estate agents quietly admitted buyers were avoiding Cedar Hollow entirely after the sabotage allegations surfaced. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer still said almost nothing publicly. That silence continued unsettling everyone more than open anger would have. Instead of grandstanding, Mercer expanded bridge security, accelerated repair schedules, and cooperated fully with investigators. His crews worked around the clock under floodlights, while sheriff deputies monitored access points constantly. The contrast destroyed the HOA's credibility. Mercer looked organized, disciplined, and focused on solutions. The association looked unstable and reckless. Then investigators uncovered the emails. Search warrants targeting HOA communication records revealed months of increasingly extreme internal discussions among certain board members. While most conversations involved legal strategy and complaints about Mercer, Several messages crossed dangerous lines. Some discussed forcing leverage through bridge disruptions. Others referenced making repair operations financially impossible. One email from Martin Hale described temporary construction delays as the only language Mercer understands. The documents horrified residents. Even worse, investigators discovered Elaine Porter had received copies of many communications. Though no evidence initially showed she participated directly in sabotage planning, questions exploded regarding how much she knew and when she knew it. The pressure became unbearable. 3 HOA board members resigned within 48 hours. The association's law firm withdrew representation shortly afterward. Insurance providers began reviewing whether policy protections applied to intentional misconduct connected to infrastructure sabotage. Financial analysts warned the community could face devastating lawsuits if criminal wrongdoing linked back to HOA leadership officially. For the first time in Cedar Hollow history, homeowners genuinely feared the neighborhood itself might collapse financially. And still the bridge remained standing, only because Mercer's crews kept repairing it. That irony haunted everyone. The man residents tried to destroy was now effectively protecting their access, property values, and physical safety, while the HOA leadership unraveled publicly. Then came the county hearing. Transportation officials scheduled an emergency public session regarding long-term infrastructure oversight, bridge rehabilitation, and Mercer's proposal for a replacement crossing. The hearing drew enormous attention because rumors suggested state authorities might intervene directly after the sabotage incident. Residents packed the courthouse auditorium. Reporters filled every available seat. Elaine Porter arrived looking dramatically different from the confident HOA ruler who once dominated community meetings. Weeks of pressure had visibly aged her. The certainty that once defined her posture was gone, replaced by exhaustion and controlled panic. Daniel Mercer entered quietly minutes later. The room shifted immediately. For months, Cedar Hollow residents imagined Mercer as an enemy because that narrative justified their behavior. But sitting in the hearing room watching engineers, county officials, emergency responders, and business owners greet him respectfully forced many homeowners into uncomfortable realization. The community had chosen the wrong side. Presentation after presentation reinforced that reality. Structural experts praised Mercer's emergency response during the storm. County planners supported his replacement bridge proposal overwhelmingly. Fire department officials described the new infrastructure project as essential for long-term public safety. Then investigators testified briefly regarding the sabotage case. The room turned ice cold. Without naming suspects directly, deputies confirmed intentional tampering nearly compromised active structural repairs during a dangerous flood period. Prosecutors indicated felony charges remained under review, pending forensic analysis and additional interviews. Residents avoided looking at Elaine afterward, because everybody understood what the hearing truly revealed. The HOA's obsession with control had escalated beyond property drama into something genuinely dangerous, and they had done it to themselves. Near the end of the hearing, Mercer finally addressed the room personally, for the first time since the conflict began. The silence became absolute. He spoke calmly about infrastructure responsibility, regional development, and long-term safety planning for the valley. He acknowledged residents' concerns regarding access stability, while emphasizing that decades of neglected maintenance, not recent ownership changes, created the current crisis. Most importantly, he announced something nobody expected. Mercer intended to place the new bridge under an independent public access trust once construction finished, not under HOA control, not under his private ownership indefinitely. A legally protected infrastructure trust, guaranteeing permanent residential and emergency access, regardless of future property ownership changes. The announcement shattered the final justification for the HOA's war against him. Everything Elaine claimed to fear, the possibility of Mercer holding the community hostage permanently, disappeared instantly. And Mercer received a standing ovation from half the room. Elaine sat motionless through all of it, because in that moment, she finally understood the scale of her failure. She had spent months portraying Mercer as a selfish outsider, threatening the neighborhood. Instead, he positioned himself publicly as the person solving a problem nobody else bothered fixing for decades. And the entire county now saw Cedar Hollow as the aggressor. By the time the hearing ended, reporters surrounded Mercer outside, while residents quietly slipped away through side exits avoiding cameras. The HOA no longer looked powerful, it looked disgraced. But the worst part for Elaine Porter had not arrived yet, because later that same evening, sheriff deputies returned to Cedar Hollow with arrest warrants connected to the sabotage investigation. And one of those warrants carried a name nobody in the community expected to hear. The arrest happened just after sunset. Residents watched from windows, driveways, and glowing phone screens as sheriff vehicles rolled slowly through Cedar Hollow Estates toward Elaine Porter's house. By then, rumors already flooded the neighborhood after scanners reported multiple warrants connected to the bridge sabotage investigation. Nobody expected deputies to stop at Elaine's property. Martin Hale's arrest had seemed inevitable. The evidence against him had grown overwhelming over the previous week. Investigators reportedly recovered matching tool marks, deleted messages, and financial records connected to unauthorized surveillance efforts targeting Mercer's construction crews. Elaine, however, always appeared untouchable. For nearly a decade, she controlled Cedar Hollow through intimidation, influence, and reputation. Residents feared her ability to weaponize HOA rules against anyone who challenged her authority. Contractors avoided crossing her. Local officials tolerated her carefully. Even after the bridge conflict exploded publicly, many homeowners still assumed she would somehow survive politically. Then deputies escorted her from the house in handcuffs. The silence across the neighborhood felt surreal. No shouting crowds gathered. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. Rainwater reflected flashing red and blue lights across perfectly manicured lawns, while residents stared through curtains at the woman who once ruled their community, being placed into the back of a sheriff's vehicle. The charges stunned everyone. Investigators alleged Elaine knowingly concealed evidence tied to the sabotage conspiracy after learning about Martin Hale's involvement. Additional accusations included witness intimidation, destruction of electronic records, and misuse of HOA funds connected to private surveillance operations targeting Mercer. The details got worse daily. Forensic accountants discovered the association spent enormous amounts of community money on legal harassment campaigns, investigators, and unofficial operations never properly disclosed to residents. Internal communications revealed Elaine privately encouraged escalating pressure tactics long after attorneys warned her the strategy was becoming dangerous. The image of Cedar Hollow collapsed completely. News outlets no longer framed the story as quirky HOA drama. It became a cautionary tale about unchecked power, entitlement, and obsession. National commentators discussed the case for weeks. Legal podcasts analyzed it. Online audiences devoured every update. Through all of it, Daniel Mercer kept building the bridge. Construction accelerated throughout the summer. Massive concrete supports rose above the river, while steel crews assembled the framework for the new crossing beside the aging original structure. State transportation officials coordinated closely with Mercer's engineers, and county leaders publicly praised the project as one of the most important infrastructure investments the region had seen in decades. The contrast between Mercer's progress and Cedar Hollow's collapse became impossible to ignore. Inside the community, the HOA entered survival mode. Emergency elections removed remaining board loyalists tied to Elaine's administration. Independent auditors combed through years of financial records, uncovering questionable fines, selective enforcement practices, and hidden legal expenditures that infuriated residents. Lawsuits erupted everywhere. Homeowners sued the HOA for misuse of funds. Former board members sued each other. Insurance companies challenged coverage responsibilities. Property values dipped sharply as buyers avoided the scandal-plagued neighborhood entirely. For the first time since Cedar Hollow was built, residents realized the HOA itself had become the greatest threat to their property values. The irony tasted bitter. Many homeowners who once supported Elaine now insisted they always had doubts. Others blamed fear, admitting they stayed silent for years because opposing the board often triggered retaliation. Some families moved away entirely, rather than endure the humiliation surrounding the community's reputation. The gates at Cedar Hollow suddenly felt less like luxury and more like symbols of arrogance. Meanwhile, Mercer slowly became something nobody expected. Respected. Not just tolerated. Not merely accepted because he owned the bridge. Respected. County officials consulted him regularly regarding future valley planning. Local businesses benefited from construction activity tied to his land development projects. Emergency service departments praised the infrastructure upgrades, improving regional response access. Even many Cedar Hollow residents reluctantly admitted he had handled the entire conflict with remarkable restraint, because the truth became painfully obvious over time. Mercer could have retaliated legally in ways far more destructive than anything he actually did. He could have delayed projects endlessly through strict enforcement procedures. He could have pursued massive lawsuits against individual residents for harassment and defamation. He could have leveraged every inch of his ownership rights aggressively once the HOA declared war. Instead, he focused almost entirely on building. That realization haunted the community more than the scandal itself. The official criminal cases stretched for months. Martin Hale eventually accepted a plea agreement involving felony infrastructure tampering charges. Investigators concluded the sabotage aimed to create costly construction delays rather than outright collapse the bridge, though prosecutors emphasized the recklessness could easily have caused fatalities under different conditions. Elaine Porter's legal battle ended differently. Faced with overwhelming evidence regarding concealed communications, destroyed records, and misuse of association funds, she resigned publicly from all HOA involvement before eventually negotiating her own plea arrangement tied to obstruction-related charges. A downfall became complete. The woman who once controlled every mailbox color and lawn measurement in Cedar Hollow left the community quietly under court supervision while national audiences mocked her online endlessly. Nobody organized a farewell. Nobody defended her publicly anymore. Because once fear disappeared, residents finally saw what she had become long before the bridge war started. Someone addicted to control who mistook authority for ownership. Daniel Mercer had simply been the first person she could not intimidate. 1 year later, the new bridge officially opened. The ceremony drew county leaders, engineers, local media, and hundreds of residents from across the valley. Sunlight reflected off fresh steel and reinforced concrete, stretching confidently across the river, where the old timber structure once stood alone. A permanent plaque marked the entrance. Valley Crossing Infrastructure Trust, established for public access and regional safety. Below it, smaller lettering acknowledged the project's funding and development leadership under Daniel Mercer. Cedar Hollow residents attended carefully that morning, some out of obligation, some out of curiosity, some because they understood they were witnessing the end of a story that had changed their community forever. Mercer gave a short speech focused mostly on infrastructure, long-term planning, and regional cooperation. He never mentioned Elaine Porter, never criticized the HOA publicly, never referenced lawsuits, sabotage, or the months of harassment directed at him. Restraint earned him more respect than revenge ever could have. After the ribbon cutting, traffic crossed the new bridge for the first time. Residents drove slowly over smooth concrete lanes while looking out across the river below. Emergency vehicles tested expanded shoulders. Commercial trucks moved easily across reinforced supports without restrictions. For the first time in decades, the valley had infrastructure built for the future instead of inherited from the past. And Cedar Hollow finally understood something it should have learned long ago. Ownership mattered. Not the illusion of control created by neighborhood rules or political influence. Real ownership. Real responsibility. Real leverage. The HOA once believed power came from authority over residents. But when crisis arrived, authority meant nothing beside the man who actually owned the bridge everyone depended on. In the years that followed, Cedar Hollow changed quietly. The HOA still existed, but stripped of much of its former aggression. Residents voted for transparency reforms, board powers were reduced, financial oversight increased. Community meetings became less about domination and more about practical governance. Fear no longer controlled the neighborhood. The old bridge remained standing beside the new crossing for a while, before eventually being retired permanently. Some residents wanted it demolished immediately because they associated it with scandal and humiliation. Mercer refused. Instead, portions of the original structure were preserved as a pedestrian overlook above the river. A reminder, not of victory or defeat, but of how quickly arrogance collapses when it collides with reality. And every resident crossing the valley afterward knew the story attached to those steel beams. The HOA ignored a man who bought 1,400 acres outside their control until they discovered he owned the only bridge that mattered.